If you're applying for disability benefits or help people that are, the path to success has never been more complicated. Welcome to the Disability Expert Podcast, where we tackle the difficult issues and interview the country's top experts to help you better navigate the disability process. Winning a disability case is hard and keeps getting tougher every day. We can't promise you'll win your case by listening, but we sure think it's going to help.
This really isn't that complicated. I mean, you want to win your case, don't you? Well, then listen to what I say.
Hi, welcome to the Disability Expert Podcast. I'm Chad Brown. I'm your host, and I am so excited today to have with me Jane Johnson. Jane is a accredited disability representative, manages the disability section for Foothills Disability Law in North Carolina. And Jane, welcome on the show. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Chad.
So usually what we're doing is we're interviewing the top disability expert attorneys in the country. And that's sort of the premise of the show. But the show is actually the Disability Expert Podcast, not the Disability Expert Attorney Podcast. There's a reason for that. There are a lot of experts who come into the system who work in this disability space who aren't attorneys. And one of the primary groups who do that are what are called non-attorney reps. It's this highly misunderstood group of people who are central to the process, and that's what we're going to do today, actually in the next episode. We're in a two-part episode with Jane where we're going to take episode 1. We're going to go through and explain what is a non-attorney rep, what are all the acronyms, what differentiates them from just regular people and attorneys, what are the misconceptions, what are the pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses. We're going to do everything non-attorney rep, generally episode 1, and then episode 2, part 2, we're going to go through her story. So let me tell you a little bit about her though and why she's here. She is an accredited disability rep. She is an EDPNA, which stands for Eligible for Direct Pay Non-Attorney, which we're going to dive into and explain what that means. She's a graduate of Northern University, has a degree in business. Most importantly, she is a graduate of Courtney Elementary School. Go Panthers, where I also went. That is just one of the craziest facts that's come out of any of my podcasts. I think my dad was your U.S. history teacher at high school. It's just a super small world. But thank you so much for being on the show. I'm glad you're here. So let's dive into non-attorney reps and how they work. First, just tell us a little bit about the history of it. Like, why do they let non-attorneys into the process? What is their, how did that sort of come about? Can you give us a little, we're going to dive deep into what they do. What are the qualifications, certifications, and all those things, but just a little bit of history. Can you give us sort of background, like why are there non-attorneys in the process?
So I tried to do some research into the very beginning, and it seems like non-attorney reps have been around forever. Those are people that help people with their disability claims. And a non-attorney rep could be anybody. It could be your Uncle George, your best friend. It could be your plumber, but I don't recommend it. It's anyone can help you with your claim. Social Security even has instructions online for how to help someone with disability. And we know there have been non-attorney reps around since before 1995. There's some information about them back that early and some history I was able to find, but there's a lot of reasons for it. As I understand, the disability process continues to get more and more difficult, and it's harder and harder for people to wade through it and navigate the system. And over the years, it's become clear that there just weren't enough attorneys to handle all the cases.
Sure.
And while attorneys are very generous with their pro bono time, they have to earn a living. And there are a lot of cases that simply don't pay well. And it made it difficult for homeless people, people who only get SSI, some of the very poorest. It was very difficult for them to find representation. From the Social Security standpoint, it is easier for them when a claimant is represented. We get the paperwork in on time. We meet the deadlines. We get the records. We go between the clients, help them reach the clients when they can't. And so it's important for them. Also, for a very long time, there have been professionals who wanted to help clients, and they've gotten very good at it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people sort of misunderstand about the disability process, while I personally think sometimes it becomes pretty adversarial, definitionally, it's a non-adversarial process. And in a non-adversarial process, the goal would be for the claimant, the person who's coming through that process, to be able to get all of the information to the court so that they can make a fair decision. And so the question becomes, when you have people who have, say, compromised mental health. They have maybe lower intellects. They have chronic pain issues. Is that person really in the best position to be able to advocate for themselves, do all of the things that are necessary in a non-adversarial process to get that information over? So if you sort of look at it from that perspective, then the goal would be, well, how can we best help people navigate the process? And often that means maybe your cousin, maybe your friend, maybe the person at the homeless shelter, maybe the person who's working in a different government agency is in a position to help you. Are they an attorney? No. But there's still someone who can facilitate the process. And so I think if you sort of look at the process broadly, what we're trying to do is get all the information into the system so that there can be a fair decision. When you have people who have all ranges of disabilities, sometimes they're not able to do that. And as you mentioned, for example, cessation cases. It's very difficult to get attorneys to get involved in a cessation case, but yet, legal aid or maybe a nonprofit might be more willing to engage in that, but they're not attorneys. So I think there's a lot of good reasons for it. There is misunderstanding about it. We're going to clear all that. I know from our conversation, we're going to clear all that up today. But I think a good starting point is understanding in a non-adversarial process, people who are disabled sometimes need help. That's why they hire attorneys. It's also why non-attorney reps play a central role in the process. And so with that, all non-attorney reps are not created equal. And we're going to dig into some of these acronyms that we started with the show. But before that, I want to sort of go through. I see non-attorney reps in 3 categories. I just want to hit them briefly, let you sort of explain, very high level what they are, and then let's dig in deeper. So to start with, you have non-attorney reps who are what I would say, they're not certified. They don't have sort of any qualifications other than they're assisting in the process, even though they can be really helpful. Talk a little bit about those folks. So where do those folks come from? What agencies and groups are they with? Can you talk a little bit about sort of the non-certified level non-attorney reps?
Right. I tend to think of those as advocates. It helps me clarify. Those are advocates. Some of them know a lot. Some of them have even had some training, but they're not legal representatives. They're advocates for the claimants. They come from community support agencies, from homeless shelters, nonprofits, friends, families. They also can come from health agencies, particularly mental health agencies. And
Right.
a lot of times hospitals will have somebody on board who can help with the process. I think these reps are a great asset, but they're generally limited in the kinds of claimants they serve. For instance, there's a SOAR program through the Department of Health and Human Services.
Sure.
They're licensed, they're very good at what they do, but they only work with homeless clients.
Right.
And that's, in Social Security language, is a person who is living in the open.
Right.
The way our local office explains it, if you have a tent and it's pitched on private property with permission, you are not homeless.
Yeah.
So that's a very small group that they work with. The other thing about these groups is that usually the focus of these groups is on getting a claimant approved as quickly as they can.
Sure.
They're trying to meet immediate needs. And that doesn't happen. We know that no matter how hard you try, that 2/3 of the cases are not approved at the initial level.
Right.
And so many of these agencies will not take cases further. Most of them will not take them all the way to hearing. So often after that first or second denial, they're turning these over to either attorneys or EDPNAs to complete the job. They're just trying to get in there and move really fast and get benefits as quick as they can.
Yeah, sure. And that's been my experience as well. We work with multiple homeless shelters over the years, and frequently they would, they would have a SOAR representative. They would do the initial applications, but if they got to hearing, they would call us and bring us in and say, hey, we know you were going to help them better at the hearing and knew that. 2 other codifications, though. Let's talk about the lovely EDPNA, the eligible for direct pay non-attorney. We're going to dive into that deeper. Can you just briefly just say what that is? I may have said it in the title. I may have already given it away. But.
Well, it's the eligible direct pay is the key to it. We're, again, non-attorney representatives, but Social Security has very strict rules about who can be paid, how much they can be paid, when they can be paid, and that's to protect claimants. By the time they get their benefits, they're just desperate for money. And so Social Security protects them by ruling on how we can charge them. So to really understand EDPNAs, you need to understand how reps get paid. Once you're approved for disability, from the day that Social Security determines you're disabled until the day your monthly check starts, you are eligible for money during that period of time. It's called back benefit or back pay, and it comes in a lump sum to the recipient. Social Security says that qualified representatives can receive up to 25% of that back pay. There's some caps and some minutia there, but up to 25%. In addition, Social Security will pay that fee directly to qualified individuals. From 1997 to 2004, the only qualified individuals who could be paid directly were SSA attorneys.
Right.
That's the only people that can receive direct pay.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge, interestingly enough, I mean, I've done this long enough that we used to not be able to get direct pay on SSI cases. So it's similar. So they changed, I don't remember the year, but they change it so we can have SSI direct pay. And then this is just another step or a similar step in the same direction. But it makes a big difference because having to try to collect your fee from someone who is financially often destitute can be difficult, and not to besmirch or belittle the people who are in the process, but being able to have your fee withheld on your behalf really expands your ability to help people with a lot of confidence, knowing, because we assume, this is one of the things I don't people really appreciate in a contingency-based practice, which we have, and as a non-attorney rep you have, we risk, there's massive amount of risk because we don't get paid unless we win. And so, we used to do those SSI cases before you had withholding, and to get, to do all the work and then not be able to be paid at all, it just can be frustrating. So that's EDPNA. We're going to hit the qualifications for that in a minute. There is one more though, the Accredited Disability Representative, or the ADR. Tell us briefly just what's the distinction there between the EDPNA, and then we'll hit both of them in detail.
So ADR is a level of expertise that was established by the National Association of Disability Representatives that I'll talk a little more about in a minute. But it's an indication of professionalism and quality that I'm very proud of.
And that's administered by NADR, correct? The National Association of Disability NADR, which is interestingly enough an organization I think is really has a huge focus working with non-attorney reps. But I mean, I'm a member of NADR. Our firm's a member of NADR. There's a ton of attorneys in NADR. I mean, they play a very central role, sort of, I would say, parallel to NOSCR and the role that NOSCR plays in advocating and in lobbying. Okay, so let's step back a second. Let's dive into this issue, because I think when the claimants, because obviously our show's pretty much for claimants. If someone is saying, okay, I've got this non-attorney rep helping me, or I've found this person online who's a non-attorney rep, and I see these acronyms, what do they mean? Let's start with the EDPNA. Can you go into we could probably do a whole episode just on EDPNA definition, but can you hit the high points? What's required to get that designation? Because I do think it's important.
So first of all, you have to have a bachelor's degree or equivalent experience.
Right.
You have to pass a criminal background check. You have to pass a rigorous and very expensive written examination that's administered by Social Security. That examination covers the disability laws, the current practices and policies, and court decisions relevant to disability. The test is hard.
Yeah.
When I
That's
took
what
it,
I've been told. I've been told it's very difficult, similar to the specialty exam we have to take to be a specialist as an attorney.
Exactly. When I took it in 2013, there were, I think, about 250 people taking it that year. And in the hallway, I was petrified, because in the hallway, everybody was taking it like the third, the fourth, the fifth time. So It's not easy. It's not an easy test. So you have to pass that. You also have to have annual continuing education, just like attorneys do, and annual ethics courses, just like attorneys do. You have to maintain liability insurance.
Sure.
And then what makes EDPNAs very similar to attorneys in terms of the way they handle clients is that you have to abide by all the rules of conduct and standards of responsibility for representatives as established by Social Security. Yeah. Those are the rules of how you perform, how you handle yourself, how you manage clients, how you do your business. And those are for attorneys and non-attorneys alike.
My exposure to non-attorneys has been since day one. There's some really good ones in North Carolina in addition to yourself. And so when this process went through and they looked at the qualifications, I think the thing that people need to understand is someone who carries that designation may be carrying it so they could get their fee paid directly. But the requirements that go into that place them at a level where you're almost certainly going to have competent representation, because you just can't get the designation unless you really have a high level of expertise. So let's jump into ADR. Tell us about ADR. What is that designation?
So to be an ADR, you first of all have to be a member in good standing with NADR, but we have at least 6 additional CEUs annually, including 1 hour of ethics. And beyond the Social Security's rules of conduct, we have a code of ethics that is much more stringent and that we agree to adhere to, that makes sure that our clients are taken care of.
So, and you're both.
I am.
And a lot of non-attorney reps are carrying both of those, which is good. Okay, we're going to dive in here just a minute to a little bit more detail about how people become non-attorney reps, because I think the path that they take is really important. But before we do that, I got to hear a word from our sponsor, CBIG.
Hey there, this is Kevin Rosenquist from the Disability Expert Podcast. Every week, Chad and his guests discuss the disability process and how expert attorneys help their clients obtain the Social Security disability benefits they deserve. But obtaining disability benefits is only half the battle. After winning your disability case, understanding Medicare should be your top priority, and that's where CBIG comes in. Disabled individuals must get their Medicare coverage right. Trying to understand Medicare can cause anxiety, uncertainty, and even fear. CBIG works with Medicare beneficiaries on disability around the country and is committed to helping those on disability navigate the complex Medicare process. Visit cbigcares.com today to see how CBIG makes Medicare simplified. Mention this ad and receive a free gift when you schedule a 10-minute consultation.
Okay, we are back, and I am sitting here with Jane Johnson, and we are going through all things non-attorney rep. We spent some time talking through sort of the specifics in the acronym world of non-attorney reps. But one of the things I think is interesting is when I interview people, like I haven't yet to interview anyone, and when they did their high school career guidance, like it said disability lawyer or non-attorney rep, like that just doesn't exist. I haven't interviewed anybody yet. I've had a few people who took some Social Security classes in law school, but other than that, no one sort of dives down this route. There's lots of reasons people stay in it. That's the same with non-attorney reps. But with non-attorney reps, the background of many of them is indicative of their level of skill when they become reps down the road. Talk to us a little bit about that. So we're going to talk next episode. We're going to talk about your story, but there's a lot of similarities in the backgrounds of people who are non-attorney reps who carry these designations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Most people come to this from having served in some other part of the process. So there are a lot of people who were Social Security employees, Social Security claims reps, people who've been handling Social Security from the other side for years and were very client-centered and saw that they could be of benefit on this side of that wall. There's also the state agency, which makes the initial determinations, disability determination services. Many people come from that. Some of the best non-attorney reps I know come from DDS because they just know how the wheels turn there. Also, paralegals and administrative staff from attorney's office, I'm seeing increasingly that attorneys are actually sending staff, disability attorneys are actually sending staff to become EDPNAs so they can expand their practice with more people who can handle hearings. They also might be nonprofit workers that have been advocates, that whole list we talked about earlier, that have been advocates and have a lot of experience in the advocacy work and just want to be able to do more.
Yeah, I mean, and that's my experience. I don't think her episode's dropped yet. Christine Burnside, who runs the disability section for Duderman Law in Greensboro, North Carolina. I know in our conversation, I don't think it was on the episode, but I know in our conversations before, like they have a non-attorney rep who's come up as a paralegal, someone who's very, very qualified, and it's like, hey, this is someone that really can be a good rep. I know. I think Kim Bishop in Durham, who's a really good disability workers' comp lawyer, I know she has a non-attorney rep works in her office. So that makes a lot of sense. A related issue, though, is a lot of non-attorney reps actually own their own businesses. And I think that's an interesting dynamic as well, and also can lend to sort of a higher quality representation by that group. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that's sort of where we're going to get into that. I don't want to get into the next episode yet. But we're going to get into that, but that's sort of where you started. I know you're not there now, but that's where you started. Can you talk about how a lot of non-attorney reps do own their own businesses?
That's right. Many non-attorney reps start as a one-man shop. And
Right.
because of that, they're doing everything.
Sure.
They do all the paperwork with Social Security. They're the contact with Social Security, but they're also talking with their clients on a daily basis. And there really is no substitute for knowing your clients.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but that hands-on work gives them greater insight into clients and their conditions. But I also say there are many small attorneys' offices I know that do the same thing.
Very similar.
Attorneys are more likely to at least have one paralegal or a couple of legal assistants to help them. But it can be a very hands-on business, and the more hands-on it is, I think the better you are as a rep.
Yeah, we went through this. It's very similar to like how, I'll deal with people like I've had guests on my show who I know open hundreds of cases a month. I've had guests on my show who do 50 cases a year, and anywhere in between on the spectrum. And one of the issues when you get into law firm management and disability work in non-attorney reps as well is how do you manage caseload? And one of the fights we have internally is, should we have a paralegal or a support staff admin who handles the case from very beginning to end, and they do all of the work, but it's almost impossible to replace if they leave? Or do you split the work up and say, I'm going to have a specialist at intake, which is the route I've done both in my history, but we do that route now. We take a specialist at intake, specialist for records, specialist with documents. We bring the attorney in, sort of at the end of the process. And so I certainly, in the cell phone non-attorney rep world, that makes a lot of sense. If they're beginning to end, then they know the client, they know the whole process, and really that can add to the level of disability. I want to ask you one final question. I think that's certainly one of the strengths. What are your thoughts on sort of the strengths and weaknesses of non-attorney reps? Like, what do you think is differentiating sort of the better ones from the ones maybe who aren't as good? But what are sort of the strengths and weaknesses that you see in that space?
So I think that certainly a strength is because of where they come from. Most of the non-attorney reps have a really good working knowledge of what happens when a case hits Social Security. They know where it goes. They know who looks at it. They know where to call if something goes wrong.
Yeah,
They
sure.
Understand the process, kind of integrally understand the process. So that's not a mystery to them.
Right.
The weakness, of course, is we're very aware that we didn't go through the rigors of 3 years of law school. So we sometimes have to dig harder on some of the specifically legal processes. That being said, I think when we're starting out, that those two things are just reversed for attorneys and non-attorneys. Attorneys understand the law. They get that. They can read it and tell you what it said, but they don't often know the system when they're starting out and understand how the system works. So, yeah, so it's
I think that's very fair, by the way. I think that's a very fair assessment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I find that working with the attorney in our office, she is so much stronger in her writing skills and her interpretation of the law. But I am so much scrappier. I am more creative in figuring out ways to fit our person's claim into the laws.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
I'm more scrappy in refusing to take no for an answer just because that's not exactly what the law said. I'm less.
Yeah.
I think I feel I'm less bound by that, and I fight harder in some ways. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That may not be true in general, but I think for a lot of non-attorney reps, that's true. That we know we're not attorneys, so we're scrappier and fight.
Yeah, you got that boots on the ground mentality. You're in there with the client every day. We got to change their life, and that's good.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That's going to be a wrap for part one. We are going to do a 2-part episode because I want to hear your story. I think it's important that we talked about this before. I think non-attorney reps are highly misunderstood in the process. I think often to their detriment, which is, I think, a shame, because one of the things you said in the very introduction, which I think is really true, is there aren't enough reps helping people. There's not enough. If every person who's on disability hired someone to represent them, we'd implode from all the weight of all the people. So the fact that they're there, especially when they're trained and go through the right processes, is really just a strength in the system that brings people. And so thanks for explaining that. That is going to be a wrap. Please hit subscribe. Watch episode 2 of my interview with Jane, where we're going to hear her story. And thanks a lot.